Hello, everyone. Again, thanks for joining and welcome to the session on Learning Product Management 101. Now, this session is being held as part of the Learning Engineering Ambassador Program sponsored by the Learning Agency Lab. I'm Sudhir. I'm a Learning Engineering Ambassador, and I'm currently working as a Senior Learning Product Manager at Axway, which is a Gartner leader in API management. I design learning experiences for our customers, partners, and employees. So it's more of sales enablement and technical enablement and empowering our users to use our product well. I have been a teacher. I taught at a university and I've been an edtech entrepreneur and a product manager. I have a master's in computer science from IIIT Hyderabad, India, and a master's in educational technology and applied learning from Carnegie Mellon University. In the United States. So that's about me. Off to Uttarika.
Yeah, hey everyone, so nice to see all of you. I'm Uttarika Shetty. I completed my master's in learning science and technology from Teachers College, Columbia University. And I deeply care about, designing effective technology in classrooms. And this experience comes from the fact that I have used technology as a teacher in classrooms, and I've felt deeply disappointed with the kind of technology that's out there. So yeah, I want to do something to change that. And I currently work as a research assistant at Transformative Learning Technology Lab under Paolo Blickstein in Teachers College itself. Okay, so this is just a brief agenda of what we'll be doing. We're just going to go through, give you an overview of learning engineering, an overview of product management, but our focus would be to really take you through the product management phases and look at the connection between learning engineering and product management in depth. Okay, so what can you expect after the session? So we just wanted to set expectations here because learning engineering, product management, they're both very heavy topics. And especially learning engineering is a process and it's still being, evolving actually. It's a continuous process. So take this session as an inspiration for you to start thinking about the connection. It's like the tip of the iceberg. So we cannot really cover everything in this 2-hour session. It's a lot. So yeah, take it, take it as a starting point and see how much you can, take from there. So it might, after the session, you might feel like it's too much of information, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. We will be giving out handouts or resources for you to refer to after the session is complete, and also you'll have the recording, so you can refer to it whenever possible. So how to make the most of the session? We are going to be focusing on individual topics, but that will just be an overview. Ideally, again, like I said, make the connection between learning engineering and product management, but also try to see how you can connect it in your field of work, because that would be interesting for you. Please leave questions, comments in the chat. If you feel like we're saying something that you don't agree with, please go ahead and do it. That's perfectly fine because we are also learning through this process. If you have questions for us, we might be able to only respond to it, in the discussion and Q&A phase. We are not really looking at the chats right now. And yeah, like I mentioned, we will be giving you resource handouts. We'll be sending a recording of the session. There's a certification of attendance here and a feedback form. I just want to emphasize the feedback form is very crucial for us, because for us, we are going to look at that feedback form and see how we can make, have more discussions around product management, learning engineering in the future. So please give us feedback. We are looking for it. We're looking forward to it. Yeah, and I think a very important thing that we take for granted is the fact that learning engineering, like I said, it's easier said than done, right? I mean, it's complex. There's a lot of things that's evolving in time. And I think it's important for us to understand that it takes time and a lot of effort. So it isn't easy. And very importantly, the context is so important. Something that would actually work in a public school at Harlem, New York City might not work in a different city where you're coming from. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. And this presentation might seem slightly prescriptive, but stick with it and just try to connect the dots to the field of your study. Moving on, I think before we start, I want to just talk about this one quote by John Dewey, which says, "If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow." And this is what I feel about the technology that's going into classrooms. I'm not saying all of it, but some of it. And I feel like technology in education is becoming more reactive rather than responsive. And we need to start being more reactive. We need to start designing technology that could help the students or children or whoever your target audience is, to design, to basically bring about a change in the future. And that needs to happen through designing better technologies. So the introduction to learning engineering, and before we get into what learning engineering is, I would want to speak about what engineering is. So scientists care about the truth of how the world works, but engineers they're probably the ones who create scalable solutions using science. So engineering is the application of these scientific principles to design and building machine structure and other items. So the question that we are working towards is, how do we engineer learning to design technology that influences learning in a very large scale? And that is exactly what learning engineering is all about. But to really go deeper into learning engineering and the definition of it, is that learning engineering is a process and a practice, right? And it is iterative. It's constantly going to evolve with time. And it applies learning sciences. And learning sciences are proven learning theories, such as constructivism, situated cognition learning, cognitive apprenticeship theory, and they use these principles to apply them in technology. And how do we do that? We do that using human-centered methodologies. And interestingly, human-centered methodologies cannot just focus on usability, but also needs to focus on the learning design, which is also crucial. Finally, it has to have data-informed decision-making, and the data has to be defined at every stage of your product development phase. It cannot just be in the end. And we have to be very mindful of what kind of data we're using. Just to give you an example, I have worked very closely with Scratch. And Scratch is like a high-level block-based visual programming language. And it's aimed primarily for children as an educational tool for programming. And the target audience is around ages 8 to 16. Ideally, what students can do is they can drag and drop, these block of codes, and they can create their own projects. They can create games, they can create media, and they could express their creativity using code as a way of doing it. So Scratch is based on different learning science principles, and I won't be able to cover all of them, but the main principle that it stands on, it's grounded on, is constructionism. And constructionism is a belief that effective learning experiences grow out of active construction of all types of things that are personal and meaningful, and they're developed through interaction with others, and they support thinking about one's own thinking. And I think that is exactly what Scratch does. And the second thing that Scratch does is, individuals get immediate feedback from using the tool. So they can drag and drop, create an algorithm. And if it doesn't work, they will probably be able to see it. They'll be able to see it on the screen itself and make changes to it immediately. So it's more like, they're thinking through trial and error. And they're making sense of it while they're engaging with the tool itself. And that is exactly, that is how active learning happens. And if, active learning is also superior to passive learning because it forces your brain to connect information and the work to understand. And that's exactly what Scratch does. So, that's over to you, Sudhir.
Yeah, thank you, Udarika. So that's a quick, high-level overview of learning engineering. So now I would like to introduce product management. Again, we had a very diverse audience for this particular session. So we're, some of them students and some of them are learning engineers who want to break into product management, and some product managers who wanted to learn more about learning engineering. So that was definitely challenging, but I think you will empathize with us on that front, that we are assuming all this diversity and then have designed this particular session. So what is a product? And again, you have heard the word product so many times, right? So it is an outcome of an action, and that particular action is deliberate. Like, for example, you are a product of your university or a school, you're a product of your society. Now, this printer is a product of the company Hewlett Packard. And again, this product may be tangible or intangible. So your cell phone is a tangible product that you can hold in your hand, but the WhatsApp chat application on that cell phone is an intangible product of the parent company Meta. Now that you know what a product is, so what is product management? Again, though the word management is being used here, now this word is all inclusive and includes planning, developing, launching, and managing a product. Product management is the role and function within an organization that is responsible for the product's overall success. Now, it is that sweet spot at the intersection of user experience, technology, and business. And again, this is one way you can kind of define product management, but there is more to it than just this. But you can see that it's not just about technology, it's not just about user experience, it's not just about business, but to have a balance, amongst these three. And as though the life of a product manager was not complicated enough, we add one more important element, that is instructional design when it comes to learning product management or edtech product management. Now, you can also see that some people kind of overlap this instruction design circle just on the user experience and call it something like a learning experience design. But I think in my experience and also kind of thought process, instruction design kind of informs all the three, that is user experience, technology, and business. Of course, there may be exceptions, but there are cases where it does. Now, what is the session about? What motivated us to organize this session? Now, I've personally been an edtech entrepreneur way before I had a formal education in learning sciences, and even before I had any formal education in product management. Though I used things like chunking and empathizing with users, etc., as an edtech entrepreneur, I did not have a formal education in these disciplines. Now, I was introduced to learning sciences only during the METALS program, that is a Masters of Education Technology and Applied Learning program at Carnegie Mellon University. And based on my experience in the industry and also my entrepreneurship experience, I feel that learning science and engineering has mostly been confined to academic studies or has not been extensively used in edtech products. And again, of course, there may be some big companies, like Pearson, McGraw-Hill, etc., who are investing in the learning sciences research. And of course, there also could be like medium-sized companies who have a research and development department, who have a very good instructional design team with learning science experts, etc. But I think still there is that kind of a siloed approach wherein they do not work closely with product management to create the edtech products. And that is what motivated us to kind of organize this session as a part of this Learning Engineering Ambassador program. Now, I think that we need a middle ground where academic research meets industry and learning science can be applied meaningfully to the development of edtech products. Because I have seen a lot of things like cognitive task analysis, things like assessment, reliability, validity, etc., during my course of academic study at Carnegie Mellon University. But, when it comes to the industry, it's more like, how many questions did we upload on the LMS, right? We're not even talking about reliability and validity. And then blending learning engineering and learning science with product management, I believe, is that middle ground, because product management is that overall process used to build the products. And the product manager, though he or she does not have that formal authority in a company, still owns the product vision. And I think that is where it's important for product managers to become learning product managers in an edtech enterprise or a company. And the second point here is what makes edtech product management unique, right? For example, say you are buying something on Amazon. Your need is that you want something and you're able to, with some clicks, able to fulfill that need. And the same thing happens when you want to transfer some money from your account to your friend, or want to pay a bill on some application that belongs to your bank. Now you can see that the user's needs are being fulfilled immediately. Whereas that is hardly the case in learning products. Learning is the ultimate need, though the users may not understand that. Particularly if we're talking about kindergarteners using technology, or primary school students, they may not know that. But ultimately, we want learning to happen, and that takes time. So I think that makes a tech product management very unique. Now, technology is a means to an end, and there is a symbiotic relationship between the instruction, which is inspired by learning sciences, and the technology. Again, technology is not just about drag and drop, or menus, or color on your website. I think it's more than that. Now, I like to see this as a two-way street. Say, for example, that you have found some learning science research that shows that collaborative learning is impactful. Now, that research has also provided you with some guidelines on what works and what does not work with respect to collaborative learning. Now, this then informs the design of your software features. Now, how do you group the students to collaborate? How will those in that particular group communicate with each other? Technology now becomes a means to apply that learning principle. Your software also becomes a means towards that end. And these become your features, software features. Both instructional design and technology, I believe, should serve an ultimate goal, and that is the user's needs. The learner, it could be the learner's needs, it could be the instructor or the teacher's needs, and it could be the a district superintendent, or an employer who wants to skill their employees. So I think there are a lot of needs in play here, and this is where I think the product manager can become that focal point to understand those needs, and everything, all the actions flow from that user needs, and that is the core principle of product management. Now, what is a product, and what is product management? So who is a product manager? Now, product manager is the person who identifies the customer's needs and the larger business objectives, that the product should fulfill or will fulfill. He or she articulates what success looks like for a product, and rallies, a lot of teams to turn that vision into a reality. Now, you can see, I particularly see the product manager as a kind of entrepreneur within the organization. And as I said, I have been an entrepreneur myself. And that was also one of the reasons I was more kind of, attracted towards the profession of product management. Of course, it's not your money that you're investing, and probably that's a good thing, but you also own the product vision, right? And you're accountable. A product manager has to work with many teams to make that vision into a reality. Okay. So now it's time to meet our product managers. By the way, I like both Tom and Jerry, so no hard feelings or judgments, please. We are just going to use these two characters to represent a conventional product manager and a learning product manager, and then compare the traits at the end of this. And again, a lot of product managers may be doing some of these things. So it's not definitely our intention to generalize something, but I think it's necessary to make the distinction of this uniqueness about a learning product manager. So what are the product manager skills? We have seen that product management is all about rallying teams towards a particular vision, which meets users' needs, and at the same time, you need to achieve organizational outcomes. Now, to do that, a product manager has to have some basic skills to be able to communicate to those teams effectively. Of course, he or she does not actually code, or create a software, but they do need to be familiar with some basic concepts, like how web applications are developed, what is software development cycle, the basic cloud concepts like how an API works. At the same time, product managers work closely with the marketing team, or in some small companies or startups, product managers also develop as that product marketing person. So they need to understand things about marketing, go-to-market strategy, etc. And product managers also sometimes manage profit and loss, which is called P&L. So they own a budget and will need to know some basic finance and account-related concepts like income statements, capital expenditure versus revenue expenditure, cash flow statement, revenue recognition, etc. So similarly, I think for an edtech product, it becomes important that the product manager understands these basics of learning science and instruction design to be able to communicate well with those instructional design teams and the research and development teams, depending on how they are structured in your organization. Now, to provide some structure to this session, we have used the product management phases as a pivot. So these are some common terminologies for the phases of product management. There's strategy, there is design, there is launch, there is implement, and there is measure. And again, these are iterative phases, though they are shown in a kind of linear fashion in this diagram. You can move from any phase to any phase in either direction. And again, that is what the two-way road signifies. And we'll go through each of these phases now. So let's start with the strategy, right? Strategy in general is a plan to achieve something, okay? The word has its origin in military as a plan of operations to win the war or a battle. And you can talk about different kinds of strategy. There is at the organization level, there is corporate strategy, there is go-to-market strategy, there is communication strategy, there is growth strategy, how you bring users into your platform. But in this session, we are interested more in the product strategy, and the product in question here is the learning product. So product strategy is all about what you want to accomplish with your product and how. What you want to accomplish cannot be obvious things like I want to make more money. That money will come, but you will make that money only if the product accomplishes something for a user who is willing to pay for that accomplishment, right? I like the way Gibson Biddle, who is a popular product leader and former VP of product at Netflix, puts or articulates product strategy. He articulates that product strategy is a set of hypotheses for how to delight customers in hard to copy, margin enhancing ways. Okay. So there are various kinds of frameworks out there for strategy. And again, a product manager needs to kind of have some basic understanding of those frameworks. And again, you don't have to marry yourself to a particular product. Again, you can fine tune these according to your needs. But one such framework is called as Porter's 5 forces. And this is a model that identifies and analyzes 5 competitive forces that shape every industry. Okay. And this model is used to determine an industry's weaknesses and strengths in terms of these 5 forces. Again, we'll not be covering these frameworks in detail, but for this particular framework, let us just look at 2 of these forces, like threat of new entrants, right? It's basically telling you like, how likely is it that new entrants will be able to kind of copy what you're doing and enter the market quickly, right? And then there is this threat of substitutes, right? For example, what is unique about what you are doing? Or will there be substitutes, right? So again, this model can be applied not just to a larger industry like education or e-learning. It can also be applied to a segment of the industry. And you can also model this to test segments of your business strategy. Like if you have a instructions design strategy, then probably you can also apply Porter's 5 forces to determine how unique that instructional design strategy is. And, for example, recently I also read a paper which applied this Porter's 5 forces model to analyze higher education as an industry in Canada. And I put that reference in the handout. Product strategy canvas is another way of framing your strategy. It has a vision, a challenge, a target condition, and a current state. So, for example, in this hypothetical example, you can see that the strategy says in 10 years, Uber will be the cheaper alternative to. I'm sorry, there's a fire alarm, so you'll have to bear with me. And I'm not sure if there will be an announcement, to go, and I'll have to wait for that announcement, but that background noise will be kind of disturbing, I believe, for some time. So basically, we are saying that in 10 years, Uber will be the cheaper alternative to owning a car or taking public transportation. And in order to reach our vision, we need to reduce the wait time in key cities to less than 5 minutes by January 30, 2018. And in order to reach our challenge, we first need to have at least one driver for every 50 people in each of those cities by January 2017. And after measuring, we know that this is our current state. I think what we're trying to emphasize in this particular session is, can you have something similar for your instructional design strategy also, or for your learning product strategy also? Like, for example, you could say in 5 years, Jerry at the company will be the leader in intelligent tutor marketplace for higher education. And in order to reach our vision, we need to create not less than 3,000 intelligent tutors for difficult topics. And don't worry if you don't understand too much about intelligent tutors. These are computer systems which can give immediate feedback and can personalize the learning for a particular student. Right. So this product strategy canvas is just an example of how you can use something that is conventionally used just for business, also for your learning products, to create your learning product strategy as well as your instructional design strategy. Then there is something called as blue ocean strategy. Blue ocean strategy is all about stop thinking about beating the competition. Start thinking about making the competition irrelevant. Right. Now, contrast this with a red ocean, where everyone is struggling for market share because your product has been commoditized. Commoditized means a product or service has become identical to the same type of offering. And probably that is the case in the K-12 segment today, wherein everyone has some product for math and they aim that they can achieve mastery. So again, by commoditize, you mean like, do you really care which dishwasher liquid you buy? As long as it serves that purpose of cleaning your dishes, I think you're fine, and don't look too much at the brand. That is what commoditizing means. Now, there are two ways to create blue oceans. The first is companies can give rise to completely new industries, as eBay did with the online auction industry, or Amazon Web Services did with the concept of cloud. Okay, but these are very few and rare in occurrence because they are born out of innovation and something very unique. But there's a second way which is being used by many, and that is when a blue ocean is created from a red ocean, when the company alters the boundaries of its existing industry. Now, this is how Henry Ford came up with the concept of Model T. That was the first mass-produced car in the whole world. It was Ford's dream to build a car that, like the horse carriages, could be used for daily use. So instead of focusing just on the wealthy, he focused or tried to convert the buyers of horse-drawn carriages into car buyers. So the question to ask here is, can you use some learning science principle to create a blue ocean for your learning product? Okay.
Thank you, Sudhir. So just to make the connection, now that we have learned these different sorts of, business strategies, how do you connect that with learning strategies? So just to, before we get into the connection, I just want to introduce and tell everyone who's new to learning sciences or engineering that there are different learning strategies that's already proven. And we have chosen very simple examples so that we just, give you, so that it's easy. So first, to start off with, we have something called dual coding, and I'm sure all of us have come across this. The idea of dual coding is the fact that you have verbal and visual references put together, because scientists have showed that it's way more effective than just having text. So that could be one way to bring in a learning strategy. The next thing could be spaced learning or spaced repetition. So when a learner is first introduced to unfamiliar material, the brain struggles to establish neural connections. One way to improve these connections is to take a break from studying the information, and return to it again and again. And I'm sure you've heard your teachers and your parents say this again and again. But these are strategies that have actually proven to be quite effective. So just taking that, and I think the connection here is something that we want to create between business strategy and learning strategy. So for example, one, we wanted to show you how, so we can go next. Yeah. So in the first example, we wanted to, if you're if your business strategy is to have middle schoolers or high schoolers, learn the basics of programming, what could be the learning strategy? So the learning strategy could be, let's make them learn computational thinking through the process of, creativity using code. That could be one way of, supporting the learning strategy to business strategy. Or let's say you want a marginalized population to improve their literacy rates. The way we can go about with that is that, you want to increase the reading fluency and comprehension of Black, Latino, and Native American students using spaced repetition. So what we have done here, we are being more specific on what literacy rates mean. We are being more specific on the marginalized population, that is target population, and we're also bringing in a strategy here to support that point, because learning strategy and business strategy need to go hand in hand. Also, so here, this is just an overview. Like I said, all the decisions taken, actions undertaken by a business is for achieving the larger vision. So you need to figure out what your larger vision is and then have all the actions support that. And one of the actions is going to be your learning strategies. So you have to be very specific on what your learning outcome can be and identify important actions that will lead you to achieve those goals. And like we said, it connects to each other. So just to make the differentiation between a conventional product manager and a learning product manager, a conventional product manager does not consider learning engineering tools, and probably does not consider learning engineering tools even while using strategy models like Porter's 5 Force or product strategy canvas. But a learning product manager would consider all of this from the start itself. So that comes to an end of strategy. We'll probably move ahead to design. And I think design is such a powerful word that's used so many times in so many different ways, right? And design can mean so many different things. It can be graphic design, visual design, interactional design, instructional design. But I think design is, from the way we are looking at it, it's intentionally thinking about a particular problem and leveraging that as an opportunity. So if you see, the third definition is what we are focused towards. Interestingly, IDEO came up with this framework of desirability, feasibility, and viability to design solutions. But I think it's important for us to look at this from the perspective of learning and usability. So let's look at some of the questions for desirability, right? So if you're looking at, usually a conventional product manager will look at, will the solution fill a need, or will it appeal to them, or will they actually want it? As a learning product manager, you might have to do extra, and you might have to think about, will it fit into a learner's lives, or will the learner feel like they have learned something out of this? From the feasibility perspective, you might ask questions like, is the technology needed to power the design solution available or within reach? How long will this take? But it's also important to understand that learning science principle is not an easy thing to execute. And that will also take time. And that will take a lot of thinking and strategizing on how you're going to take that learning science principles and apply it onto your technology. Sorry, just going to go back. I didn't do viability. Viability is really about, understanding, yes, you need to understand if your product will have a return on investment, but you also need to understand if it will have a learning impact and the learning outcome, because that's also important. Yeah, we could go to the next slide. So just to, quickly, in the interest of time, design thinking is this whole framework. You start with understanding, you start with exploring, and then you start with utilizing. I'm just going to go quickly into the next slide. Okay, so this is such an important point, right? And I'm sure 70% of us sitting here probably are, all of us sitting here belong to the 70% of the iceberg that's immersed underwater, because we really, we don't know what we're designing for. And that's important for us to understand. And that's exactly why we do something called a cognitive task analysis, not just to understand the behavior of the user, but to understand the cognitive process of the user, which is also very crucial. moving to the next slide. So these are certain, ways of doing a cognitive task analysis. You can have a structured interview with experts. Now, why are we choosing experts here? So let's say you have a concept and you have experts in that concept, and it's important for you to interview them because experts are very different from novices. Experts have patterns, they have very deep understanding of a particular subject, and it's important for you to identify those patterns because you can. So then it would probably be like a goal for novices to reach, and how you reach that is also a crucial thing for you to realize. So you can do experiments with them. Could you go back? Sorry. You have think alouds for experts and novices for performing tasks. So you create these tasks for them to really, understand what they're going through, like I said, cognitively. And there's something called difficulty factor assessments, basically to, define potential challenges that they might face while experiencing a task. And you have to design assessments for that to identify it. Let's move on. So another thing that we just want to bring out here, this is something called backward design. It's a very popular instructional design methodology. And what really happens is you start out with a desired result. You start backwards. You start with the result, then you determine the acceptable evidence, which is your data, and then you actually go into planning the learning experience. But what we're trying to say here is that you have to understand the user needs. Before understanding the desired results that you want them to achieve, I think it's important for us to understand what does the user even need. Do they understand fractions, or are they not even inspired to learn fractions? Because that would make a huge difference in how you're going to approach to do this. Moving on, this is a famous quote by Albert Einstein, which says that, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. So from our experience of Sudhir and my experiences, we have noticed that a lot of edtech companies jump into solutions and do not spend enough time in problems. And I think that's a very crucial step for us to do. So while we're understanding, the problems, we also have to see how we turn them into opportunities. And you have various frameworks in design thinking that you can use. And one of them is like a how might we sort of activity that you can do with your team to really look at how you have a particular insight and how you can turn that into an opportunity of learning. Next. Yes, this is like the most crucial part that we want to, drive home to all the edtech entrepreneurs here. Literature review. It's such a, there's so much gold out there that we kind of miss out on. There's a lot of research that's done. There's a lot of tools that have already been designed that could be used today also. So it would be great if, you spend a little more time doing literature reviews, because it kind of like, it gives you a lot of inspiration on how you can go about designing your solutions. So, yeah, and I think these are ideation methods. You can look them up. Crazy Yet Sketches is a very famous thing where you focus on quantity rather than quality, like get out all the ideas that you have, and then you can choose which one works. And then there's mind mapping, and there's analogies. So I don't think I'm going to get into the depth of it. Yeah. Right. So once we, look at ideation, I think it's also important to understand what kind of learning theories you want to incorporate in your ideation phase itself. We have chosen few of them. So one could be learning agency, like trying to give the ownership, not trying, scientists have said that giving ownership to students is very effective for their learning. And one of the examples that we have here is, and it's a very simple example, it's ideally just giving them an option to schedule their own learning rather than telling them what they should do, I mean, but also at the same time, this is just a very simple example, but it's really about, having them think through, having them create meaningful or purposeful projects that they want to do. And I think that's really important. Another important thing that you can think about is scaffolding. So scaffolding is a very famous learning theory that's used to provide a support to students to reach a particular goal. So this is an example of an app where the student needs to tilt the screen for the fraction to reach the number line. So how would you probably give hints, right? So you have various forms of frameworks that you provide them with, like you go with hint 1, then hint 2, and then you hopefully help them reach and understand why would 1 by 3 actually fall between 0 and 2 by 3. And I think it's important, the point we're trying to say here is that during the ideation phase, when you're designing and coming up with different sorts of tools, it'd be interesting to incorporate these learning theories also that could actually help you support their learning process too. And I think storyboarding, storyboarding could be such an effective way to understand not just how the user will use your app, but also at the same time, what kind of learning is happening at different stages. And that would really help you also flesh out every stage in more depth. Yeah, and then I think, ideally, after you're going through this ideation process, it would be nice if you could pick out basic variables that is important for you as a company, and try to see, which variable makes more sense in terms of, trying to build this edtech app. And I think you work together as an individual, and you probably come together as a team and discuss what would make sense in terms of usability and the learning experience design. And finally, prototyping. And there's just several tools out there that you can use to prototype. But yeah, I think the idea of prototyping is that, again, you get a complete experience of what they really want to do. So if you go to the next slide, you can also start with paper prototypes. It's not really necessary for us to, create prototypes on a fancy app. You can just use simple paper, and that could also help you get so much insights about their learning and their usability, which is also low cost. So, yeah. And I think finally, I think one point that we want to make here, this is a lo-fi prototype for now, but I think it's important for us to realize that, a lot of prototypes that are created don't have actual content for learning. And when you're creating prototypes, I think it's important for us to make sure that we have actual content, because you're not just testing the usability, you're testing how they're learning through that prototype too. So, and also you will probably get a lot of information from them in the first 5 interviews itself. There's research that shows that 85% of the potential issues are discovered in the first 5 interviews. So you can figure that out with very less number of interviews rather than, having a big one. Okay, so moving on. So after prototyping, you go around testing it, and there are different ways of testing it. It's like the most simplest examples that we have chosen just to drive home the point. If your A/B testing is one way of doing it. So you can have text only and text graphics, and you can test it out with different groups to see which one works and which one doesn't. Yeah. Like I said, and I've been telling this time and again, that learning is not equivalent to usability. If they're having fun using the app, they might not be learning anything. So it's important for us to constantly keep that in mind when we are actually designing it from the start. The most important thing, and this is something that is come up in recent times about the challenges in testing. Let's say you're testing feature A with group 1 and testing feature B with group 2. And let's say that feature B is more effective. So what really happens is that group 2 gets the most out of it. Their learning increases, but group 1 doesn't get it. Their learning does not increase, and it stays stagnant. And that could bring about ethical issues and question on equity, right? So ideally, to solve this problem, it's important for us to switch it and make sure that if you're testing feature B with group 2, you test it with group 1 too, and make sure that they are also getting the same thing out of the technology rather than, just the one group. Yeah. So this is an example of a prototype with actual content that was tested to validate a learning design that aimed to create engaging scenario-based activities. This particular example is about active listening. It's not a functional software. It's like a hi-fi prototype created using Figma and the tool named Prototyper. And I think such validation is important because your development resources are expensive and you need to be using it optimally. So So you do get feedback immediately and you know what's working and what isn't. And the reason why we're showing this is because a lot of us don't really do this in depth because it's just a prototype with actual content, and it's important for us to do that. Okay. So just to give you a holistic view, like, you ideally in education research, you do quantitative and qualitative research. I'm sure you all know about that. But I think it's important to do both. I mean, it depends on the context too, because quantitative can give you data that could be universal, but it's so important for us to look at the context, because something that could work in with a marginal community might not work for a privileged person. And it's important for us to keep that in mind. Yeah, and finally, these are some questions that we had, which you could use. Basically, just examples that could help you drive home, the research study. Yeah, and I think lastly, I'll just conclude by saying that we kind of like try creating features that actually could be tested using the MVP. But it's important to, create a particular feature that meets the requirements from the first round itself, and not just towards the end. So the idea really is that, try to create a feature that works in the first iteration, and then keep evolving from there to the end, so that you finally make the user happy in terms of both usability and learning. And yeah, I think that is a wrap. Just to summarize, this is what we're looking at as a conventional product manager. You solely would focus on a software design and UI usability. You're not aware of the learning strategy. And in the UI, your scope is just prototyping and validation. As a learning product manager, you try to understand the instructional materials, you're aware of the learning strategies, and you're using prototyping and validation to validate the learning experiences. Yeah, and that's pretty much the end of the design phase.
So before we start looking at the implement phase, which is our next phase in this product management journey, I think I wanted to make one point clear about these phases. Though we have shown just one path from strategy to measure, there may be more than one initiative going through these phases throughout the lifetime of an organization. For example, consider that initiative one is your main web and mobile application that you are creating as an edtech product, as a startup from the scratch. And then there may be other initiatives like initiative 2 and initiative 3, which could be more around designing the instructional content that go with that particular software. And initiative 4 could be about building a collaborative learning feature in your software, which you do after launching your initiative 1. So just to make that point clear, that we are looking at these cycles. Different initiatives can have these same cycles. Now, so you have found your strategy. You have defined the problem. You have ideated the solutions. You have prototyped your solution. You have validated the solution. And you have also defined your minimum viable product. So I think there is now a degree of confidence, that you have as to what is the right thing to build. And now comes the question of how do you build this thing right, in the most optimal way, right? And that is where the implement phase comes in. Now, implement is all about project management, and we will look at a methodology commonly known as Agile. It has its roots in software development. Agile is a project management method that is characterized by the division of tasks into short phases of work and frequent adaptation. And again, I'm not sure how many of you remember the Roadrunner character. I think that is an example of being ultra agile. You will understand the definition of agile better when it is contrasted with something called as waterfall. And by the way, learning by contrasting cases is also one of the learning approaches. And if your design was inspired by learning sciences, you would come across that research. As you can see, in the waterfall method, you define, build, and release your product over a large span of time. It takes a lot of time to deliver value. The product, by contrast, in the agile, you use short cycles of define, build, and release to deliver value sooner to your users, frequently and incrementally. Now, the product increment that you deliver in agile at the end of the short cycle is usually termed as potentially realizable product increment, PRPI. This is the term that is used by Scrum. And this particular potentially realizable, the word potentially realizable means that it is usable by the end user, but you may decide not to release it because it may not make sense. For example, if in the instruction design, say for example that you have only one chapter of the book that is ready, you're not yet ready to publish or release the book, until all the chapters or all the topics in the book have been covered. Now, the agile in software development is driven by what is known as Agile Manifesto. And in 2001, there were these 17 people who met in Utah to discuss the future of software development. The Agile Manifesto emerged from that meeting because they felt that waterfall in software development is not a very optimal thing to do, because you can see that at the end of maybe 1 year after you release the product, you may feel that something is not working, and then you come again back to the define phase, and you have wasted your 1 year of time to build something that was not found valuable for your users. So that is where they came up with this Agile Manifesto, and this manifesto kind of gives these four principles. That is, it asks you to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, to value working software over comprehensive documentation, to value customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and to value responding to change over following a plan. And again, this does not mean that you should not have a plan or you should not have documentation, but all it says is, provide more, focus more on the things on the left than on the right. Again, Agile is an umbrella term for many frameworks. Scrum and Kanban are two that are used by many. And again, in this session, we will focus on the Scrum framework. And again, to do that, we will first understand some basic blocks. The first such building block is called a user story. User story is a small self-contained unit of development work designed to accomplish a specific goal within a product. And again, we have been saying this from the beginning, that user need is at the core of the product management, right? So it is important to know that this is your user story, not your story, or not your company's story, or not your CEO's story, right? It must represent your user's need and their motivations. And again, these user stories follow this particular format as a dash. I want to do dash, so I can dash, right? And an example has been made up on this particular slide. As a customer, I want to add items to a persistent shopping cart, so I can save the items for later. And again, this is a very condensed way. And you can see that you're kind of adding structure to your creative work, because creating a product is a creative work, but at the same time, you cannot have creativity which does not have some kind of a structure, because organizations do not sit on a pile of infinite resources like time and money. And again, depending on what you're trying to achieve through your product, you may need many user stories. So it is helpful to kind of group user stories and create some meaningful structures. A group of stories is called an epic, and a group of epics can be termed as an initiative. And similarly, stories can be further broken down into tasks and subtasks. Note that you can also group tasks together into an epic. So this organization is not rigid. All this says is that there is a way to structure your work meaningfully. But user stories are at the core of that product manager or the product management role. And again, this example may make things a bit clear. You can see that user stories like create an account and travel preferences, linked family profiles, etc., are grouped under an epic called as user management. And similarly, all booking related stories are grouped under the travel reservations epic. Right. And again, user story for the sake of development is incomplete without what is known as the acceptance criteria. And again, acceptance criteria are nothing but the conditions that must be met to be accepted for your product or that particular feature to be accepted by your user. For example, here on this particular slide, you can see the user story says, as a registered user, I want to log in with my username and password so that the system can authenticate me and I can trust it. Okay. And for this, a product manager can write an acceptance criteria like, given that I'm a registered user and I'm logged out, so this is setting the context. So if I go to the login page, enter my username and password and click on login, then the data associated to my user should be accessible. So this is a list of conditions that must be met before the product manager kind of says that this user story is complete or is ready for release. In addition to the user story and acceptance criteria, there is another related concept that is important, and that is the definition of done. Okay, and definition of done can be at various levels. It can be at the user story level, it can be at the sprint level, and it can be at the release level. And again, this is a list of activities that has some common housekeeping items. Like for example, at the user story level, if it is about the software, you could have things like it should pass the accessibility tests as per WCAG 2.1. That is those are the accessibility guidelines. Or it could be things like unit tests have been written and passed, or this works on Google Chrome browser and Safari, or on this particular device, on that particular device. So these are some common housekeeping items. And again, these also could be, the definition of done can be defined at the sprint level, wherein you could say that every single store, the definition of done for every story is being met, the product backlog is being updated, and we will see what a product backlog is in a future slide. But again, the point that we are making in this particular session is that you could also have, learning stories. And remember that in one of the earlier slides, we emphasized that users' need must be at the core of everything. And, and we also said that things like learning objectives and backward design must flow from the user's needs. So I think user stories created for instructional design task, that is what we mean by learning stories here. I think they can help to blend the learning engineering and product management. You can create instructional design tasks, under these learning stories. What can be the example of such tasks? Things like brainstorm with the subject matter experts, understand the learners, do a cognitive task analysis with an expert, do a cognitive task analysis with a novice, develop the activity, publish it in our learning management platform. I think all those things can be tasks under the learning stories. And in this way, you bring your instructional design into your product backlog, and that is the topic of our next discussion, the product backlog. But I leave it to you to think of like what can be the kind of acceptance criteria and definition of done that can go along with these learning stories. So according to the official Scrum guide, the product backlog is an ordered list of everything that is not known to be needed in the product. So it contains features, functions, requirements, enhancements, fixes. And each item in the product backlog adds value to the product. And again, it is a group of user stories which is prioritized, meaning that you know what your user needs or what has to be shipped into your product. Earlier, so here, for example, that the user story one, the one that has priority one has to be shipped, before the one that has the priority two. Now, imagine this product backlog having both your software development user stories and your learning stories. And again, this brings that, kind of software and, instructional design together for an edtech product. Another important concept, to understand in the agile implementation phase is the definition of Scrum teams, or these are also known as development teams. Development teams consist of professionals who do the work of delivering that PRPI, the potentially realizable product increment, sorry, at the end of each sprint. Now, these teams, again, the Scrum guide recommends that the size of these teams should be somewhere between 3 and 9. But what you can see on this particular slide is two particular terms that have been highlighted. That is, these development teams are self-organizing and these are self-sufficient. And again, is the role of the product manager to create these Scrum teams, to organize these Scrum teams in a way that the sprint goal is being achieved, and these goals could be different. And again, on this particular slide, you can see three different organizations of teams. You can see one particular, Scrum team here, which consists just of learning scientists, instructional designers, data scientists, and Scrum masters. You can see one particular, Scrum team or development team, which just has, software engineers, like, you have your cloud architect, you have a full stack developer, or you have a quality analyst, and you have a Scrum master. And then you have another unique team, which has both instructional designers, full stack develop. This is where you bring both the, instructional designers and learning scientists with the, your software team, because as we said earlier, that learning strategy, the learning science principle kind of informs your software. And I think it's also a good idea for your engineers to know some things about the learning science principle, which is being implemented. And I think that is where the learning product manager can act as that gel to bring different teams together. And the heart of this Scrum is a sprint, and it is a time box of 1 month or less, during which that potentially realizable product increment is created. Okay, and again, from this diagram, you can understand that it's a the first definition here says it's an act of or short spell of running at full speed. You might have heard of a 100-meter sprint in athletics. So it's about delivering value earlier and quickly and incrementally. Now, this picture represents the entire Scrum framework visually, and this was created by Scrum Alliance, which is the organization which provides Scrum certifications. Now, what do you see in this picture? You have 3 artifacts. One is the product backlog. You have already seen what a product backlog is. Then there is something called as a sprint backlog, which is again a list of items. We will see more about this later. And then there is this increment, and we have already seen what this increment is. This is that PRPI, potentially realizable product increment, that your Scrum team creates at the end of every sprint. And again, we said that the sprint is a time box of 1 month or less, and usually teams use things like a 2-week sprint, a 3-week sprint, or a 1-month sprint, and organizations usually experiment around this. And again, as I said, different initiatives can use different time box sprints. And I'll give you an example of this in a future slide. And then there are 4 events in this particular diagram. You can see there is something called a sprint planning. There is something called as daily Scrum. There is something called a sprint review, and there is something called as the sprint retrospective. So these 4 events and 3 artifacts, these are the kind of the core of Scrum. So coming back to the first event, which is your sprint planning, right? It is a time-boxed event for 8 hours, considering your sprint is of 1 month. So if your sprint is of 4 weeks of 4 working weeks of time, then you have to dedicate 8 hours of time for sprint planning. This is where your Scrum Master, who is a kind of a person who kind of organizes these meetings and works with the product manager to create, maintain this product backlog, etc. Creates this meeting wherein what is the input to this particular meeting? You have your product backlog, as the input in this meeting. And you have seen that the product backlog was a prioritized list of user stories. And what we did not cover is a concept of story points. Story points is a kind of a way of measuring, what kind of an effort is required to implement a particular user story. And again, there are various ways of doing this, and we'll not get into the details in this particular session. But imagine, just understand that this is a way of, kind of estimating your efforts. And you can see that this particular example gives an example that the first story needs 2 story points, the next one needs 1 story point, the fourth user story needs 3 story points. So, and again, these story points are not equivalent to days. So 2 does not mean 2 days. 2 story points does not mean 2 days. In fact, Scrum kind of discourages you to talk about story points in absolute terms, though business owners are having challenges about accepting that fact. But story points is more about the relative size of the complexity of implementing that particular user story. Okay. So you have the product backlog. So the product manager has already worked and kind with the team to understand like what is the complexity or the effort needed, and the product manager has also prioritized it based on the users' needs and based on the business needs. So that is the input to your sprint planning session, and this is where the Scrum team comes together and picks up the items from your product backlog. And because it is prioritized, they just pick the items from the top of your product backlog. And again, this is where the product manager does not have a say on what are the items that are being picked by the sprint, by the Scrum team, etc. But the only rule here is that the Scrum team has to pick the items as per the priority that is the top of the product backlog. Okay. So the Scrum team creates what is known as a sprint backlog. So they come together and say that, okay, these are the things that can be taken together. These are the user stories that can be taken together, and they create what is known as a sprint backlog, which is one of the artifacts that we talked about. And once you have the sprint backlog and your sprint has started, and again, we are assuming that this is a 1 month sprint. So usually, and we have told you that the recommended team size is 3 to 9. So what the Scrum team does every day is every member kind of joins this 15-minute meeting called as a daily Scrum, when every member of the team quickly goes through like what he or she did yesterday, what he or she is doing today, and does he or she have any blockers. That is what is done in the daily Scrum. And again, you should understand that it's a very quick kind of exchange of updates. You're not going to kind of go in depth if there are any blockers. It's the duty of the person called as a Scrum Master, which is another role, or the product manager in some cases, to kind of schedule more meetings if needed to overcome those issues or blockers. So at the end of this 1 month sprint that we have taken an example here, you create this increment, which is a kind of a usable thing. And it need not be just the software. It could be your, instructional design activity, which is ready. It could be a chapter of your book, which is ready. That is the increment that we're talking about. And what happens in the next event, which is known as sprint review, which is again time boxed at 4 hours for a 1 month sprint, is that your whole Scrum team and your relevant stakeholders come together and review what was being developed, what value was being delivered during that particular sprint. Okay. And then you have an event called a sprint retrospective, which is time boxed at 3 hours for a 1 month sprint, wherein you're not talking about the increment, but you're talking about what went well during the sprint and what did not go so well during the sprint, and what can you improve in the next sprint. So again, this is more from the agile perspective. This is nothing to do with or the processes that you need to put in place in your organization to make the agile process more effective. And this is where I would like to bring in the concept of an assembly line. And the cars that you see on the slide are the Model T cars that I was speaking about, that Henry Ford first, mass produced in the US. The point that we're trying to emphasize here is that your design and development cycles have to work like this assembly line, and it's the duty of the product manager to kind of keep all the teams busy with work. So you cannot tell your engineering team, I do not have work for you for the next 2 months, please take a vacation. So I think, this is where you should kind of develop these or plan for these design and development sessions so that you have this such kind of an assembly line. And one example that I can give you here in terms of instructional design is a personal experience of mine, where, the company that I was working for was creating instructional activities, engaging animated videos for, topics in the K-12 segment, things like Newton's first law of motion, etc. in physics. So there were 4 subjects, there were 8 curriculums, and the 8 curriculum from different states and 2 languages. So that was a formidable kind of a thing there. But you can see that the instructional design strategy was already fixed. They wanted to create animated videos, which could make things very engaging for the user and very simple for the learner to learn, right? So that instructional design strategy was already fixed. So in the implement phase, we had this challenge of how can we effectively implement the strategy, right? And I had a team of 75 subject matter experts, 15 instructional designers, and 20 graphic designers, who could design the assets and do the animations. And, we came up with a strategy that we need 2 days of brainstorming, 2 days of storyboarding, 3 days of animation, 1 day of voiceover and presentation, by a person who had that kind of a nice instructor voice. And then 1 day of quality check and 1 day of publishing. So you can see this was like a 2-week sprint, wherein all these particular phases could be fit in. And again, it depending on the phase, you had different Scrum teams coming together. For example, in brainstorming sessions, you have had the SMEs coming together. In the storyboarding, you have a mix of SMEs and instructional designers and graphic designers coming together. And in animation, you had just the graphic designers working with the help of some SME as a point of contact. So again, this is one such example where you can bring in kind of, you can use Agile, not just for software development, but also for content development and your other instructional design implementations. And again, just to summarize, what's the difference here is that the learning product manager maintains the epics related to instructional design as part of the integrated product backlog for a learning product. And that is how you can bring visibility of the instructional design team and, make them a part of the learning product. The learning product manager, as I said, brings together these instructional designers, scientists and software engineers together in these self-organizing and self-sufficient teams, Scrum teams. And again, drafts user stories related to the software and also related to the learning needs of the users. Designs and has design items for both the software and the instruction. So that was all about the implement phase. The next phase that you have when you have implemented things is to launch your product. And again, here, I think we don't have a lot of learning engineering at play, but the only thing that I would say is helpful is, when you look at things for marketing, like, if you have, there's something called as a marketing mix in the go-to-market strategy. And, one of the frameworks is these 4 Ps, which are product, price, promotion, and place, and the place, where you want to promote your product. And again, the relevant P here, I think, where the learning engineering perspective can be helpful is the product. How does the product meet your needs, and how does it stand out of the competition? What kind of learning science principle is it being used? What evidence do you have to show that this works? How does the company produces it? You have a nice research and development team, you have an instructional design team which has put a lot of efforts to bring this product. All that I think has to go in this marketing mix, in the go to marketing strategy. And I think that learning engineering perspective adds credibility to your marketing initiatives. And again, this is not an unknown thing, and I think this is one just example which I picked from the internet about Alex. Wherein they use such kind of a messaging driven by a kind of learning engineering and learning science perspective. Marketing funnel is a way of describing your customer's journey. So you start with awareness, and awareness is when somebody learns that your product exists, that your company exists. It is during the consideration phase, I think, where I think the evidence of the efficacy and your learning engineering and learning science related messaging, I think, can play a very important role. To create, send more of the, to convert more of your leads, based on the kind of messaging that you have. And you can see there's something called as advocacy. That is when your current users, support your future marketing funnels, and create a kind of a snowball effect for your organization or for your product. And I think this is effective because this is organic. You're not paying them to talk about your product. These are your users who are talking or who are saying good things about your product because they know that your product works. So I think it is in the best interest to create a learning product which has those learning outcomes. And it may take some time to see those outcomes, but I think it's in the long-term interest of a company or an organization to focus on those learning outcomes. So as I said, it's more in the terms of the messaging that I think the learning product manager can add value and see what kind of a messaging can be used and work with the marketing team to provide that learning engineering kind of a perspective there. So coming to the last phase of our product management phase, which is the measure phase. And again, this quote is attributed to Peter Drucker, a management theorist. The basic tenet here is that, if you're measuring something, the probability of you acting on the information is a lot higher, and your actions are more purposeful. Again, we can, things need not be very perfect or, and I think this should not be construed as a kind of way of putting some kind of constraints on the creative process of creating instruction. But I think, as I said, organizations do not sit on a pile of infinite sources of resources. So I think it's important to also measure and manage, and that is where the product manager comes into, a role comes into play. And, these are some things that I found on the internet, which I found relevant to share in the session. And again, one of, the measure phase can not only help the edtech products to iteratively improve your product, but I think they can also help in making things transparent to the end users. As I said, things like assessment, reliability, and validity. I think this is a very serious business when you say that student is lacking in this particular skill, because I think we're talking about demotivating that particular person or the learner. I don't know how confident are we in our judgment that we are saying that this learner needs improvement in this particular skill, right? Just because you have built a very nice looking dashboard, which says, in green and red that this is the student who needs, attention, this is a low performing student, this is a high performing student. These are labels I think we have to use very kind of carefully, because we're talking about a learner, and that could make or break the career for that particular learner. And also there are trends like artificial intelligence, and all the companies and organizations want to become very trendy, saying that we use artificial intelligence. But I think there are things like algorithmic bias, and things like the reliability, and things like false positives, that you need to start looking at, measuring, and not just measuring, but also making it transparent for your users. And one such thing that is being used in the business world is something called as OKRs, which stands for objectives and key results. And the objective is an intention, a target, or a desired outcome, right? And there is no need for this objective to be measurable, and that is the job of the key results. But these key results are actionable, time bound, and very specific. So on this slide, we have just made up an example of how you can also create a learning OKR, which can inform your instructional design team or a research and development team, whatever you call them in your organization. For example, here it says the objective is to implement an effective reading fluency program. So what are the key results that you want to see during this quarter? You want to A/B test 3 reading fluency programs to determine the most effective by the end of this quarter, and you want to increase the reading levels by a rate of 1.5 level per year, starting this year. I think this kinds of guides, such a kind of a quantitative framework, kind of helps you. And again, this is based on the basic tenet as what gets measured gets managed. And again, you can look at key performance indicators, and this is where you can bring some learning KPIs. There could be a course level metrics like these: new course enrollments, and what are the backlog items you have completed related to your learning or instructional design, your end of course survey results. I remember, very, clearly, how this was a great debate in one of the organizations that I worked for as to should we just use, kind of some metric like, on a scale of 1 to 5 after every video, to just feel that, to get a feel of like, how are the students feeling, or, what do they feel about that particular video? Did they feel that it was engaging or not? I think, having such measures, and again, these measures also go through their own design phase. You cannot just say that there is no perfect recipe of, these are the metrics. I think you have to, kind of design and develop these metrics over a period of time and experiment them. Then there could be content level metrics like, what are the drop-off rates by content type? What are the progress rates? What is the summative assessment performance evaluation scores? What is the most popular content based on views and completions, etc.? And then, of course, there could be your business metrics like net promoter score, your churn rate, your MAW and DAW, which is monthly average users and daily average users, etc. And again, product managers usually work with such dashboards, which they look at the start of their day. And I think this is where a product manager can also look at the learning dashboards and bring in those learning KPIs into these dashboards to see, for example, like which district is doing what, if it is a K-12 example here in a B2B space, or which school is using your instructional materials more, etc. And again, this is one such example which I created as a hobby project, and there's a lot of data out there in terms of, like, for example, this particular dashboard tells you like how many, grade 8 pre-algebra enrollments were there in the year 2019-20. So I think you can use this data to build dashboards, to design your experiments, and to create your learning OKRs, based on these measures. And as I said, I think that particular measure thing can give you some very nice metrics for your outcome focused messaging. And this is one organization that I came across in my career, known as Art of Problem Solving. If you make a statement, again, I'm not sure about I have not verified that these are true, but if you make a statement like all 12 winners of 2019 Math Olympiad, USA Math Olympiad, with alumni of your program, I think that makes a lot of impact on your marketing and for your product itself. And again, as I said, Learning Product Manager monitors both business and learning related metrics, see the values of these monitoring learning outcomes, and not just for outcome focused messaging, but also to iteratively improve the learning product better, and leverages frameworks like OKRs to set, measure, and monitor learning outcome along with your business outcomes. And again, this last slide kind of just summarizes like what are the various things which we talked about in this particular session, and that was a lot. But I think we also tried to kind of put this in this framework, and I think we were successful in that intention of how we hope that we were successful in our intention of bringing that learning engineering and product management together through these learning product management phases. Okay, credits to the Slides Carnival company, which provided this good presentation templates and photographs that were provided by Unsplash. I think yeah, that's it. We are at 1:40 p.m. and think we can take questions and we can open the floor for discussions. And I think, as we said, this is not just for asking questions, but I see a lot of people with a lot of experience here in this fora. So you can share your experiences, challenges, and I can also share some of my experiences, with respect to whatever we talked about or any other topic relevant to this particular session.
Yeah, bro, I think you can go ahead.
This was such a great session and covering so many different aspects of this. And I really love the way it shows how multidimensional this kind of work is, that necessary intersection between project management and learning engineering. So kudos to you guys. And I'm really looking forward to getting the PowerPoints and such. One thing on that last piece about measures that I might add is how important and still rare it is to not just measure kind of learning outcomes, but also motivation outcomes too. That even the best designed learning environment for, grounded in learning science and so forth won't do any good if the learner won't start, persist, or put in mental effort. And I think it's not as common that people are checking up on the actual motivation of users to engage in it, and even to design interventions based on a learner actually not thinking they can do this, or actually not valuing what they're doing, or thinking things are in their way. And so from a measurement standpoint, it's another piece to think about. I think it's underdone in the ecosystem right now, is to actually look for information and provide it to teachers as well as developers about which students are having difficulty, not because of cognition, but because they're just not engaging. And the great thing about technology platforms and such is you can actually get evidence to help support a hypothesis that says, wait, this student is not engaging, as opposed to this student is actually not understanding, is engaging but not understanding. And those are major differences. But I'd love to hear your observations about that as well.
I think that's a wonderful topic and a perspective that you brought in, Bar. Because I think motivation is, again, such a meta construct, things like motivation and engagement. It's so challenging. And I think it's very important, as you said, to make those explicit in your design. And I think that is where those users' needs and understanding their motivations becomes very important. Because I think a learner who wants to kind of participate in a math Olympiad, his or her motivations are very different than the learner who just wants to kind of pass his high school and go to college. So I think understanding those motivations and personalizing the learning, I think that's a blue ocean in itself, I would say. And I would also say that when we talk about motivation, there are things like intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation, and there is this concept of gamification and leaderboards. Because I think when somebody told me that we are giving the learners who complete the tasks a pizza, I said, okay, I mean, is pizza a good enough motivation for completing your assessments? So I think there are a lot of things to look at in this field, but also be mindful of whether do we do things just for the sake of doing, like gamification and leaderboards, or how do we really understand what the intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivations are, and how do we design? Again, love to hear more from others.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, there has also been a lot of research that's coming out recently that says that the mental health is one of the biggest focus right now in school districts because of the pandemic and the effects of it on students. So now they've really started looking at, mental health and social emotional learning, which has become such an important structure. Danielle, you can probably go ahead.
Thank you so much. This has just been such a comprehensive overview. I want to build on what Flora was saying, because our product, Change Up Learning, focuses on adult learners who are educators and after-school professionals. And we always have a very active conversation around how to measure the learning impact for adults who are working in classrooms and learning environments. And so that was my initial question was, are there examples of that anybody else in this community could share on how they measure learning impact for adults? Right now we use self-reported learning, which, to Broer's comment on the chat, isn't reliable. And we're aware of that. So we also are prototyping a supervisor's observation, so an external manager. And I'm just curious if anybody else has other measurement ideas. And then to this very important point around measuring motivation, we really looked at the hooked model and studied a lot around behavior change and built our platform in this way to include motivational prompts that hopefully are intrinsically motivating and externally, but I never thought about measuring that. And I'd love any ideas or examples of other companies that might be doing that or products.
I think I'll just wait for somebody else in the community to answer, and if not, I can share my perspective, because I think I'm also working on the other learning part of it in my current company. But yeah, if anybody wants to kind of share their experiences, please go ahead. Okay, I take the silence as a no, and I think maybe I can answer part of it. But I think when it comes to adult learners, particularly the way that I look at it, and my company currently looks at it, is I think it's the proof of pudding is in the eating kind of a thing. So we want that adult learner to learn something because they want to, they have a need. For example, in our case, they want to learn more about our product, not for the sake of learning about our product, but to implement the product to meet their requirement of whatever problem they are trying to solve, right? So I think that is where scenario-based activities of creating those scenario-based assessments is helpful, I believe, and those are more reliable and valid. And again, that field of reliability and validity itself is such a kind of a sophisticated one. And I do understand that organizations do not have that luxury of waiting for 2 years or 3 years to come up with those reliable and valid assessments. But I think we have to start somewhere. But I feel that those scenario-based assessments, wherein you actually ask the learner to use the knowledge that they have acquired to transfer to a particular domain or a scenario, I think is kind of more reliable and valid.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thanks,
again,
Bora, for this link. Sorry, just noting that Bora popped a link in there. So appreciate it. If anybody else has other ideas, feel free to pop the chat, and I'm going to pass the speaking mic to somebody else who might have a question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, for that question. Adesinaloy, I'm sorry, I don't think I pronounced your name right.
Yeah, it's Adesinaloy.
Okay, thank you for telling me that.
Yeah, thank you. I came in pretty late, but I'm just going to just shoot my question right out because I'm just in the process of kind of designing a learning program, right? That's based on a learning app that I'm also designing. And basically, my question is, and so we're doing like adult education, right? So it's kind of related to Daniel's question, and it's about when you look at the chain of delivery, right, from the research of the product, most of the time, the research that you're doing from the learning science angle, right, what you're basing your product on, and the research of the user experience on the product, and the research of the program itself, so that you have like the things that have been talked about, like the metrics and things like that. I want to know, like, are these phases actually connected, and working on them in isolation, right? Does that affect the experience of the learner at the end of the day? Because if you go through the process from the beginning, where you have designing the application, most of the time the problems with motivation or isolation or other things like that is because the application itself has not been designed to actually take those things into account. And what you have are applications that don't actually find ways to actually solve those problems from the get-go, right? So I just want to know, like, in the whole school of thought of learning engineering, how does it matter that those processes are actually gone through and not just hopped in, like, along the process? Yeah.
Thank you. I think I understand that question, but I'm not sure. But Uttarika, take a stab at that if you want to.
I think from what I understand, you're asking, if an application is designed, there are various different things, like you have user experience, learning, engineering, all those things. And sometimes what really happens is that there couldn't be enough engagement, or there couldn't be enough motivation. And I think they look at it only towards the end and not in the beginning. Is that what you were trying to ask? You're muted.
Yeah, basically. So I'm just asking that, when you go through the process of the learning engineering process in creating these solutions for the learner, and before you deliver it to the learner, how important is it for you to go through the whole process, right? From the sense of engineering learning and also the application, and how important is it to go through the whole process instead of just cutting through and going maybe directly to, and how that affects the actual experience of the learners and both the users at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to actually, think about it from the beginning itself. And I think that's exactly why prototypes are so important, because you're actually thinking about, motivation, engagement, and application of your subject matter or cognitive processes. So I think it's like, you consider these learning sciences strategies from the beginning itself and try to see, be very specific of your learning outcomes. And that is something that we covered in the design part, where when you're looking at learning science outcomes, like Bro spoke earlier, it can just be about motivation. Like, how do you inspire them to, become better learners? So you take that motivation, you take that as your learning outcome and just design for that. And then you build on it, is how I would say. And I think it is the kind of, I mean, we cannot have the processes separately. It has to happen together. So you have to bring the team together to actually work on that specific learning outcome. That's at least what I think. Yeah, I don't know if I answered
just to add my perspective, I think I would just say that, again, we added that disclosure in the beginning. It's easier said than done. And I think I kind of empathize with the question, wherein you have things like you already have an application and you don't have a lot of control over changing how that learning application works, and you're still tasked to kind of do some things. So I think it's a kind of iterative process and developing that mindset. And I think it also needs some kind of a leadership mindset, and also, of course, the decision to invest in that design. But in the long run, I think that is going to be helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the answers.
Julia, you can go ahead.
Thanks. So I was thinking back to a slide you had a while ago in the section on product management and agile teams and the different kind of makeup that can happen in different agile teams, some that are more developer heavy, some that have instructional designers or others kind of in those small teams. I was wondering if you had any, I guess, strategies on how to run agile with mixed experience or cross-functional teams like that. At least speaking from my experience at Pearson, agile is pretty much reserved exclusively for developers, and some product managers can get, I guess, they might say, though, this is only for developers, or others don't have access because this is just, we want to make sure that the developers are moving fast. And so they're kind of not including others in the agile process. So any thoughts on how to kind of open up that agile process while still maintaining speed and agility, obviously?
Yeah, I think I empathize with you, Julia. But, I think that notion that, bringing agile to other teams will slow up the software development. I'm not sure if I kind of agree with that, because I think what we're saying is, the intention there is that you need to organize those teams around a cause. And if that cause is to design a learning application, so software developers just cannot go and create, buttons and drop-down menus and, software just like that. I think that is where the learning experience designers or the learning scientists come into play. So if that was your goal, to create a learning application, I think that is where it makes sense to bring learning scientists and software developers together. But if it was just about your goal is to prevent your web application from being hacked by hackers, I think that's more of a technical goal, which makes sense that you just have a Scrum team of developers and software engineers working on that. And again, there could be a case that, like the example that I gave you about creating instructional videos. That is purely an instructional design task, and that Scrum team could be made up of entirely the instructional designers, or it could be you're creating intelligent tutors and there's already a tool for you to create, but then you're creating tutors for different topics, right? So that is where, again, there's a Scrum team just of instructional designers. So I think that context is very important. And then each of the context can benefit from Agile, because I think Agile is just about doing things systematically and kind of breaking those, that work into those chunks, as I showed you in kind of one of the slides about brainstorming and animation and voiceover kind of a stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I think part of the reason that I've run into this problem is, at least from my experience, the platform or the products that exist on a platform are managed entirely separately from the content that goes onto that platform. And so they think they can just like create the content, put it on the platform, you've done the learning, but really those outcomes that you're looking for, they don't, learners don't experience that video in isolation, and they don't experience that product or that platform in isolation of the content. It has to like come together in a meaningful and effective way. And so that keeping them separate sometimes, I mean, it works sometimes for, efficiency, but can get in the way of the larger vision. Anyway.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that, Julia, because I think you kind of summarized the reason for this session, so, and in fact, I had one of the slides there, which I, removed because of the time constraints, and it just talked about body and soul, right? So I think we need to understand that technology is a means towards an end, and that instruction, which is going into that particular platform plays a very important role. And I think they should not be kept isolated, for a learning product. They should go hand in hand. And I give you an example of collaborative learning. That is, if we want to implement a feature for collaborative learning, the product manager just cannot go and say, okay, build out some Zoom rooms and give them a chat feature to talk with each other. I think this is where it benefits to have learning scientists and go through the literature review, understand like how collaborative learning can be implemented, kind of properly on your platform. And again, it may not be perfect, but I think that's more a sophisticated and a better way of doing things is what I believe. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Smita.
Hi, I thank you for the session, and I have a question. Suppose you have a value-added skill which has results that cannot be immediately measured against a learning outcome. How do we inspire parents to get their child to take up the course or the product, and how do we measure the motivation of the child while doing this task?
Yeah, been there, done that, as an entrepreneur, and I think it's a very challenging a thing to do. But I think, that is where that resilience is what is needed, for the EdTech product management, to understand that things take time. But at the same time, they should not take forever, right? We're not talking about 10 years or 5 years that an impact will be seen. And again, I like to give this example of deliberate practice, right? So there is a learning science principle called, or research for deliberate practice, and it gives this example that, to learn golf and master, playing golf, you require 20,000 hours or something of that sort. I think I'm quoting the right numbers. But do you think we need 20,000 hours to teach, a sixth grader or a seventh grader how to solve a quadratic equation, right? So I think we need to kind of, come up with these metrics and set those goals for ourselves as to when we need to see the impact, and then kind of have some messaging, geared towards that in the platform itself or personalized to that particular learner, in some kind of a, social emotion learning strategy, saying, hey, please don't lose your motivation. We have seen learners, mastering the skill after 2 weeks of, spending like 1 hour per day, something of that sort. I think companies like Duolingo, which is a, language learning app, do such kind of a things, but I think that can be done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. I think that this is so helpful for me also. This is such a great learning experience. So thank you all for being here. I think, I think that's about it. Sudhir, do you want to say anything?
No, thanks you. Thanks a lot for joining, and please look out for the Zoom recording and a certificate of attendance from Learning Agency Lab. And I would also appreciate if you could please fill that feedback form. It should not take more than 2 or 3 minutes, and that would help us. And one of the questions in that feedback form is also about your gauging your interest in a workshop session, a one-day workshop session, for kind of taking a scenario and then working in small groups to go through all these phases of strategy, design, implement, launch, and measure. Thank you. I and Uttarika would be here for around 10 to 15 minutes. So if you want to hang out and if you have anything to discuss, you're welcome to do that. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your time.